Awesome to have you all in San Jose, where we are celebrating Achievement Through Innovation this year. I wanted to start today by mentioning that my wife, Amy Offeld, who is here today, thank you, Amy, is a licensed psychologist. And that's relevant because there are some who would suggest that my level of exuberance about California's charter schools can border on the irrational. But I want you all to know that it is Amy's professional opinion that it has never become clinical. At least not yet. But the thing is, you darn charter school people are making so much progress, it's legitimate for us all to ask whether or not we've become delusional. As the video just showed, we opened 104 charter schools in the state of California. We grew enrollment by about 49,000 students. We now have 519,000 kids in charter schools. Folks, for the first time, we have more than 500,000 kids in California's charter schools. And the pipeline for growth would suggest that we are on a trajectory such that by the time we get to the end of this decade, we will have 1 million kids in charter schools. But what makes me even more excited than that is the strengthening that has happened in California's charter school sector from an academic performance standpoint. You guys have heard us say here at the association for many years now that we have a U shape of charter school performance. By that, we mean that there's a strikingly large number of schools that have been persistently underperforming, relatively few that are in the middle, and then this strikingly large number of schools that are overperforming. So let's look at it from a graphic perspective. What we have right here is where we looked in 2007, 2008. This is what we look like today. Let's look at it again with the scale just slightly different. This is where we were in 2007, 2008, with slightly more schools in the bottom 5%, the bottom 10%, and the bottom quartile. Fast forward 5 years, this is where we are now. We have reduced by 1/3 the percentage of schools that are performing in the bottom 10th, and we have increased the percentage that was already overperforming in the top 10th. And when you look at it from the top quartile and bottom quartile perspective, we have reduced the percentage in the bottom quartile by about 5%, and we've increased by 10% in the top quartile, shifting about 150 schools in a very positive direction. So everywhere I go, I'm asked when I share this data, how is it even possible? How, during a period when California's charter schools were disproportionately affected by an unprecedented funding crisis, during a period when we doubled the size of the movement from 250,000 to 500,000, were we able to make such historic progress on academic achievement? And I think it's because of two underappreciated trends that are happening within our sector right now. The first is that we are growing what is succeeding. This year, of the autonomous charter schools that opened this year, two-thirds were replications. And what were the organizations that were replicating looking like on the performance perspective? We see this is where they are, way over on the right side of the U. This is what is growing in the state of California. Meanwhile, on the opposite side, we are closing what's not working. In the last 5 years, 145 charter schools have closed in the state of California. And of those with enough data to complete analysis, we see that approximately half, or just less than half, are performing in the bottom 10%. So we see we are scaling what is growing, and we are holding appropriately accountable that which is underperforming. And what does this mean for the broader society to have a sector generating these kinds of results? There's so many different ways to look at it, but I think this next slide is the one that I like the most. This shows how charter schools serving high concentrations of low-income students is performing on the shape of the U. Folks, that ain't a U, that's a J. Look at this. We have 3 times as many kids in schools performing in the top 10th than in the bottom 10th. But look at the scale there, folks. That's 78,000 students in schools performing in the top quartile. 78,000 students, that's the equivalent of the 4th biggest school district in the state of California, behind Los Angeles, San Diego, and just a few thousand behind Long Beach. This is what we are developing the heft to create in the state of California. But if I had to say, what is it that makes me absolutely the most excited about how California's charter schools are doing? It's to visit them. It's to see them up close. And I think you guys know, I'm a teacher guy. I'm an education guy. I'm a schools guy. I can't help it. I got to get to them on an ongoing basis. And I had this idea when they hired me that, hey, if I stuck to it over a 5-year period, maybe I could get to the point where I could say, I have seen most of the charter schools. I have visited most of the charter schools in this state. And Sharon and I used to keep a tally. We gave up at about 200 schools. I think I have about 2 times as many schools as then. But the truth is that we've opened so many charter schools in the state of California, I have more to visit today than on the day I first started. The further I get into this thing, the further I fall behind. And really, a totally legitimate use of the time this morning would be to do nothing except talk to you about the incredible schools that I have visited. But I can't do that. So I'm only going to focus on 2 today. And they're going to be 2 schools that we honored yesterday, where you saw some information about them. The first school is Green Dot at Locke. Think about Marco Petruzzi coming into Green Dot at that moment that the organization took over Locke. Locke is inarguably one of the most challenged public schools you're going to find anywhere in the United States. Amy and I both taught in just a real close proximity to Locke. I knew Locke pretty darn well before it made its conversion. And then when I was on the job, I was hearing, hey, things are going pretty good. Green Dot seems to be building some momentum, so I got a mental picture about what must be happening there. And then I went to visit. And when I set foot on the place, I realized how woefully inadequate my mental image was. The place was completely and utterly transformed. To come onto the campus, to see the state of the facility, to see the purposefulness and the calm that seemed to pervade the entire institution, to go through classroom after classroom and see the quality instruction, to see the level of engagement that the kids had in teaching, to see the level of camaraderie and rapport amongst the students walking from class during passing periods, or also to see the faculty, the sense of buy-in, the cohesion, the belief that they could actually make something better. I mean, that school is completely and utterly turned around. They have a graduation rate now that is something that is 3 times higher than what they had before. But those statistics just don't sink in like it does when you go and visit, when you see it in person. The other place that I would like to talk about is 5 Keys. And like Locke, I've known about 5 Keys for a long time. Many of you have heard me talk about my dear friend, Brian Bennett. And Brian was the person that first told me about 5 Keys. Brian passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease in the weeks before I started in this position. And during Brian's illness, I would visit him just about weekly. And you know what Brian wanted to talk about? All the way up until the very end, he wanted to talk about charter schools. Even when the disease had taken his voice away, he still wanted to communicate about them. He had a laptop. And the disease also was attacking his fingers and his hands. But he would have this laptop and he would be able to type. And he would do G-O-M. Gompers? Gompers, Brian? Gompers is the school that Brian had helped convert to charter school status. Oh, Brian, Gompers is doing incredibly well. Let me tell you the latest things that I know. F-I-V. 5 Keys? Oh, 5 Keys. Hey, I've not been there in person yet, but I hear these incredible things. They're growing into LA County, and the difference that they're making in the students' life, it's phenomenal, Brian. It's phenomenal. And yet, there I was 4 years into the job, and I'd actually never gone to 5 Keys. And I had a chance to go there. And I saw then up close and personal what you guys got a glimpse of just yesterday. And again, it's being there in person. And I remember very distinctly driving home from the Bay Area to Sacramento that night, and then the power of that visit sunk in, the power of the metaphor. I just thought to myself, what was it that Brian most wanted? Brian knew that our public education system is not performing as well as it needs to and must be improved. Brian knew that if there's any segment of our society that should be free to innovate and improve, it is public education. And yet, what should be most free is in fact most confined. Our public education system is behind bars. Our public education system is incarcerated behind a dizzying blur of state laws and district policies and ridiculous HR practices and just broken cultures. And did you hear what Steve Good said is the number one reason for being for 5 Keys? Their number one goal. It's to reduce recidivism, to make sure that those that have gone through never come back again. And I actually think that's a good way for us to think about our number one goal, to reduce recidivism. This endless cycle of reforms, the Coleman Report, A Nation at Risk, Learn, No Child Left Behind, the Standards Movement. Public education is beginning to be known as a repeat offender. And if there's anything that we have to do before society declares 3 strikes on public education and throws up its hands altogether, we must show that we believe in what Brian's hope was, which is that we can indisputably, irrevocably free public education. And I believe that that is what we are demonstrating in ever-growing numbers every single year further we get in to the charter school movement. You want to know a really good way to think about California's charter schools? We are finding locks and we are making keys. We are finding locks and we are making keys. And just like Steve Good identified 5 keys that were key to his organization's success for the future, I'd like to suggest 5 keys for the future success of our broader movement. The first key is that we simply must grow. Why? Well, there are thousands of reasons. There are tens of thousands of reasons. We have tens of thousands of kids who are on waiting lists. But we actually have millions of reasons because there are millions of families who are waiting for better options. I don't know if you guys have seen the reports that we released in the last couple of weeks about college readiness. The one that we did on Los Angeles Unified about 3 weeks ago, it showed, and this is based upon publicly accessible data that anybody can find. It showed that for the kids, only 18% of the kids graduating from traditional district schools in Los Angeles Unified complete a course of study allowing them to apply to the Cal States or to the UCs. Only 18%. Meanwhile, charter schools in Los Angeles Unified, the percentage is 76%. And the problem within the traditional schools is not something that's exclusive to historically underserved students. Folks, 20% of white kids graduating from LA traditional district schools finish A through G. It's also not just a problem for Los Angeles Unified. We patterned after our study, after a really smart one that was done here by Innovate Public Schools in San Jose, where they found the exact same dynamics. And just last week, we issued a similar report for Oakland. This is a problem that is everywhere. The truth is that the vast majority of our kids, coming from whatever demographic group, are educated in our public system of primary and secondary education, do not complete a course of study that entitles them to even apply to our public system of higher education. Is that the definition of a disconnect or what? And thank goodness that charter schools exist. Thank goodness the progress we are making. We only have 19% of the kids in Los Angeles Unified, and yet we're generating 37% of the A through G course completers. That's terrific. But we also have to acknowledge that if our collective goal is to get from A to G, we've only made it to A, or maybe A to B, and we've got so much further to go. So we have to remember to grow. The second key to our success is that we simply must grow. And why is that? Because there's never been a better moment to open a charter school in the state of California than right now. And why is that? Because of the local control funding formula. Jerry Brown's new system for funding all of public education. We in this room know the bigger picture. We know that charter schools have not been funded fairly in comparison to traditional public schools. The Legislative Analyst's Office in January of 2012 came out with a study that said that the very best any charter school does in the state of California is 93 cents on the dollar. And that didn't take into account facilities costs. And it also didn't take into account new and growing charter schools, like the ones where my kids attend, that are iced out of a vast array of funding streams. Well, fortunately, the LCFF is doing away with all of that. And over a 7-year period, we are phasing in funding equity such that by year 7, charter schools should be funded exactly the same or almost exactly the same as traditional public schools. This is a historic achievement, and Governor Brown deserves our great appreciation for standing strong on many instances during the budget approval. But for new charter schools, the situation is even better. Because rather than waiting for the funding equity to phase in over a 7-year period, a new charter school gets the full funding equity from day 1. So when we run the numbers, what we see is that for a new school opening in California, and this is not considering all of the new money that's come in via Prop 30 and the raising economy. Okay, on top of that, compared to what the schools would have gotten under the old system, most charter schools are getting many hundreds of dollars per pupil more. And many of them are even getting more than $1,000 per pupil more. A dear old friend of mine, Eileen Logue in San Diego, who has worked on budget issues in charter schools for 20 years, on a recent visit, she and I talked about this, and she said, there has never been a better moment to open a charter school in the state of California than right now. So we simply must grow. Which leads me now to my third key. You guys may be shocked by this. Our third key to success is we simply must grow. And why is that? Because there's never been the scope of opportunity within our movement as there is right now. And if I were to say, what is one shift in thinking that we've collectively seen over the last 5 years? It's away from this idea that society was on the cusp of making a big bet in a relatively small number of charter school organizations, to this recognition that society is on the cusp of making an historically massive bet on a way bigger number of charter school organizations. One of my favorite days on the job in the last couple of years is when I went to visit the head of a major foundation who knows California's charter schools very well, and we sat down and he made a mistake. Because he said, here, let me give you a little time, Jed. Tell me about what you're most excited about in California's charter schools. Bad question. 20 minutes, just a manic bender. Bam, 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 bam. 2 schools per minute. I probably was literally at 30 or 40 schools. And he stopped me. And he said, Jed, I've never heard of one of those organizations. And I said, I know you haven't. But the schools that you do know about, they're doing incredibly well too. Let me tell you the progress that they are making. But we've had this incredible growth, and we've had this incredible increase in replications, and yet the largest CMOs have really not been driving it. So where's it coming from? It's coming from the 2 and 3 and 4 school operators, the Fentons and the Fortunes and the 5 Keys. the alphas and the aces and the A methods, the classicals, the Caminos and the cooperatives, the environmentals, the Xteras, the Einsteins. You get the point. You throw me any letter, I'll throw you back a basket of charter school organizations, young and new, that are growing. And they are the very octane of this movement. And now, when the bigger players are turning their attention more back on California because of the better funding situation, think about what's within our potential now. Think about the strength of that field. And there are many of our most intelligent people in the planet who are convinced that betting on a strong field is the best way to change whatever domain you're passionate about. The Bridgespan Group, many of you probably have heard about this, one of the most respected consultant groups working in nonprofits. They have come forward with a strong field theory. And it is my contention that you look anywhere in the planet and there is not a better place to find a strong field emerging than in California's charter school movement. And that being the case, with that level of bet being made on California's charter schools, the opportunities within it are just immense. To either make your own charter school organization or to advance within a growing one. I mean, this is fundamentally different than my parents' generation. My mom, she got her teaching credential. She basically did the same thing for the next 30 years. My dad, when he got his administrator's credential, he basically did the same thing for the next 25 years. In Charterland now, find me anyone who's doing the same thing today that she was doing just 25 months ago, 25 weeks ago. This is what the level of opportunity is within our movement. And there are some who have a fear that if there's anything that's going to knock us off stride, it's maybe some kind of talent bottleneck. And don't get me wrong, it is going to be daunting to find all the incredible people we need for the charter school movement to stay on course. No doubt about it. But it is my contention that the charter school movement, this very room, represents the most powerful talent machine that has ever been assembled for public education in the United States. And we are going to prove up to it. Because simultaneous to the investments that we're making in our schools, simultaneous to the investments we're making in our staff and in our communities, all those things, we're making investments in ourselves. Because we can see what is demanded of us. We know how much we have to step up. And so all of us as a movement, all of us as individuals, all of us as leaders are committed to grow. Which brings me to the fourth key. You guys may be picking up the pattern here. Let's see. The fourth key is we simply must grow. And why is that? Because I think folks are starting to break in our direction. What do I mean by that? I wouldn't say it's one of the funnest days, but I'll say it's one of the most interesting days of my first 5 years on the job. I go to visit A.J. Duffy, who is the former president of United Teachers Los Angeles. And this was during the whole public school choice process. And I went there with a particular ask, but before I got to the ask, we sat in his office and did a little bit of relationship building. And I told him about my parents being educators and how, I had taught for 7 years and I was a union paying member for seven years. And how, we are agnostic about unions at CCSA and we want to be fair to all parties. And hey, Duffy, if you ever hear me saying something that's fundamentally unfair to unions or fundamentally unfair to you personally, you call me on it. Here's my cell phone number. And he said, Jed, that's really nice. But I want you to know that if you ever hear me saying something fundamentally unfair about charter schools or fundamentally unfair about you, you just got to know my members made me do it. So I then went on from there and made my ask. And I said, Duffy, look, I know you're going to make these applications to compete against charter schools for these programs and for these buildings. All I ask is that you do so within the context of a charter. Separately incorporate it, make it fully autonomous, embrace the full accountability. We'll provide you technical assistance. Duffy, I want you as a member. And you know what he said? I had the same idea. And I went to my executive committee, and many of them thought it was a good idea too, but not quite enough. So I can't do it. I can't. And my mental vision, my memory of him sitting there is seeing a man behind bars, seeing a guy that just wanted to be free. And I knew my job in that moment, and the job for all of us more collectively, is to hand him that key. Maybe he can't use it right away. Maybe he'll put it in his pocket. Maybe he'll use it further down the road. And listen, I agree with Reed from yesterday. This is a long-term thing. Nothing's going to be changed overnight. But when the Berlin Wall fell, it fell suddenly. And it was dismantled from the inside. And it's my contention that this is one area where we have not been as constructive as we could have been. Reed actually was tone perfect on this yesterday. I personally haven't been, and many of us, I think, haven't been. Sometimes we don't properly fight the tendency to discount the amount of capacity within the traditional system. We don't do honor to the fact that they all want to be free. And it's my sense that they're going to come in our direction, not toward charter-like freedoms. We all know charter-like freedoms don't exist. They're not worth fighting for. I'm talking about full charter schools. I'm talking about traditional public schools approaching charters and saying, can I flip under you? Can I be a part of your charter organization? I'm thinking about Mike Hansen in Fresno. He's the superintendent there. He got sick of being incarcerated. He built himself a way out of Alcatraz. He made a 501c3, and he made his own charter, the Daily School. And it opened, and it was a 900-plus API school in its first year in a community that never seen anything close to 900. And I think that it's a part of our responsibility to make sure that the Daily School becomes a daily occurrence. We have got to be able to go to the traditional system and be able to say, think imaginatively. There's nothing holding you back. We don't need changes in law. We just need you to realize that you're welcome, and there are ways for you to come onto our movement. You're wanted. Please come and help us grow. Which leads me to the fifth and final key. And the fifth key is we simply must get involved in advocacy and politics. And, you know, I actually think that that's the magic digit. You know, it's the opposable thumb of the charter school movement, something that makes our hand radically different than the hand that's been extended from any reform effort before. And I also think it's roughly in the right proportion. Whatever you may be, whether you're a funder or you want to be a board member, you're an educator, whatever it is, it's 80% focus on the schools, make them as great as they possibly can, never, never compromise on quality, embrace the accountability, but support the teachers and be ready to do whatever it is that your community and parents want. That's the 80%. But reserve a fifth for advocacy, because the fifth is what can protect the other four and completes the hand and allows us to extend something to society that's just radically different so that we can help all kids eventually. And you know, I feel about the advocacy and politics piece of this in the same way that I do kind of about the school visits. I can't possibly do justice to all the schools that I've seen. I cannot do justice to all of the individuals who I have seen in the last 5 years who have gone above and beyond to do something on behalf of this movement. So I can only choose one. I can only choose one. And I'm going to talk today about what Kumar Zazani has done at Ivy-bound academies in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. You guys may all be aware that CCSA advocates in 2012 ran an assembly race. We were all supporting Brian Johnson, and we were all very excited about it, and we ended up losing by 31 votes. But as that race was happening, Kumars came up to me and said, you have to understand, look, I know why we're going for Brian. I mean, Brian would be an A+, that's understood. But you also have to know that his opponent, Adrien Nazarian, is actually pretty strong on our issues. And I know, Jed, that you guys at CCSA advocates are going to run the election in a fair way. And I'm going to keep Nazarian with us. And so what happened after the election, where, of all of the committee assignments, where does Nazarian find himself? assembly education. Is that in your face or what? But Kumar's, he sees it as an opportunity. What does he do? He comes up to Sacramento multiple times. He introduces our government affairs team to him personally and to Nazarian staff. He has Nazarian come to his school multiple times for visits. I know he's invited Nazarian to speak at his graduation this year. And he's hosted various events, and he's also stayed on top of what our priorities were within the building, such that this last year, for the first time, CCSA was able to get a bill out of committee on a 6-0 vote, and Nazarian was there with us. So we're watching this up in Sacramento, and we're thinking to ourselves, what we wouldn't do to have 100 Kumars. And then we turned to each other and said, what, are we crazy? I mean, we have 100 Kumars. We have 1,000 Kumars. We have people who are willing to go above and beyond because they know that this movement has this potential to have that higher impact. It's incumbent upon us as an organization to start making the opportunities for our 1,000 Kumars to get involved. And so that's why we started the Capital Advocacy Leaders Program. That's why we had the 40 folks here, inspired by one man, by Kumars to do it. But we've also been testing ourselves, what more can we do? We need to make the teacher advocacy program. We need to, on the Capital, on our C4, CCSA advocates, we need to make a political council so we can have individuals from every community across California participate. And I would just ask you, challenge us if for whatever reason you don't see an opportunity that you think is consistent with what you would want to do, give us a hard time about it, because our job is to enable you, to support you in doing that fifth and vital key. I'll finish today by telling my own story about that fifth key. As it turns out, Amy's and my senator is Darrell Steinberg. And one day, Amy came home and said, hey, Jed, I have an idea. Why don't we host a fundraiser for Darrell? Because Amy has gone on to become the president of the Psychological Association in Sacramento. And she thought that maybe we could tag team. So a couple months later, there we are in our living room. There are like 60 or 70 psychologists on this side, and about 60 or 70 charter school folk on that side. And Darrell steps up, and I can see he's having a little difficulty sizing up the room. And so I stepped back up to him and I said, listen, Darrell, the way to think about the crowd is it consists half of people who provide psychological services and half of those in need of them. But the thing I love maybe more about our movement than anything else is that we would take that kind of introduction as a compliment. We are those dreamers who are working to do something that the rest of society believes is impossible. And we are showing that the charter school movement is that which dreams are made on. We at the association, it's our job to be your critical partners out there on the very periphery of the possible. When you find that one of your keys breaks, our job is to be there to help you forge another one. When you are at the very end of your strength and all you have are 3 letters left in you, our job is to help you complete that sentence. Our job is to be there such that when the walls come down, we will be celebrating what you have achieved, which will be the full reinvention of our public education system such that all kids and all families are fundamentally better served. Thank you for what you are doing. Godspeed.